Hello, welcome to the Get to Know Canadian Gaming podcast presented by the Canadian Gaming Association in partnership with Gaming News Canada. I'm Paul Burns, President and CEO of the Canadian Gaming Association. The Get to Know Canadian Gaming podcast will dive into current issues impacting Canada's casino, iGaming, and sports betting sectors, bringing you the people, the organizations who are working to build a stronger gaming industry in Canada. We will tell the stories of the CGA member companies, the industry stakeholders, and the work of the CGA. Today, I'm joined by Scott Morasch, Senior Vice President and Client Partner Organization at IPSOS, and Trevor LeBlanc, Director with IPSOS North America. Both have specialized in the lottery, casino, and iGaming sectors, working with companies across North America. On this episode, we're going to talk about channelization, specifically the CGA's recently commissioned study that investigated the rate of channelization in the iGaming sector in Alberta and British Columbia. So, Scott, let's get started and let's talk about really what is channelization and how is it measured?
Well, hey, Paul, thanks for inviting us to be here. Good question. Channelization is, I guess it's kind of an industry term used in the gaming sector, which really measures among, say, the target group of interest, so among the gambling population. Channelization is a measure of who's gambling with legal regulated sites and who's doing the opposite, so gambling in the gray market or on unregulated sites. So it's really kind of a percent of the population of the gamblers that are basically in or out. Are you in the regulated market or are you not in the regulated market? And really that's at its basic form what channelization is intended to be.
Right. So we're measuring obviously that, but is there one way to describe it? Is it so we're measuring the share of people playing in purses? We're not really talking about revenue here, are we?
Yeah, no, there is a pretty big difference in the gambling world when we talk about market share. So I know that a lot of gaming operators, they think of their market share in terms of GGR or in terms of total spend or total wagers. We can ask that in research, and we do ask that in research, but that's not what channelization is. Channelization really is the share of the gamblers, the share of the people. So basically a poll, it's counting heads. And that can be vastly different than looking at revenue-based or GGR-based market share, because you can have a same or similar amount of people gambling, say, 1 year over the next from measurement period to measurement period, but you can have a lot of growth in spend, growth in the market, because you're just getting more spend from the same group of people. And so it is important to realize that channelization it's a metric of people, of percent of population, basically, and not necessarily share of revenue.
Right. So let's talk about the methodology behind this in terms of there's very robust sample sizes that we looked at in both those jurisdictions. And it's not dissimilar to work you've done in Ontario, was measured channelization as well. So it's so if you can speak a little bit about some of that, the around the methodology, the size of sample, and how we got to, and then we'll dig into the results.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Paul. So this survey that we did an online survey that was actually 7 minutes long, and we conducted it near the end of February and through early March of this year. And we had two different sample groups. And as you said, it is very similar to the study that we did in Ontario. And our two sample groups, the first one was the general population. So we had a sample size of just over 1,000 in Alberta, and then a sample size of just over 1,000 people in BC. So we made sure that these two different sample sizes were balanced and representative of the provincial population based on age, gender, and education within each of those provinces. And we kind of look at the general population sample for things like incidents, like say how many people in the population are playing online. And that kind of points to our second sample group that we look at, which is past 3-month online gamblers, because that really allows us to look at the channelization. So just within that general population sample, we kind of take the natural fallout of past 3-month gamblers, which ended up being around 300 in each province. So within that, we also boosted, and this is where our second sample source kind of comes through. Our second sample source was a boost of 1,000 past 3-month online gamblers in BC, and then another 1,000 in Alberta. And if you combine that with the online gamblers that we got from the general population, we end up with around 1,300 online gamblers in Alberta and 1,300 online gamblers in BC. But I think it is important to talk about kind of how we defined these past 3-month online gamblers, definitely.
Yes.
So in our survey, in order to qualify as a past 3-month online gambler, they must have bet on online casino games or sports online within the past 3 months. And then they also must have mentioned that they played at least one valid online gambling website or app that offers real money bets. So what I mean by valid is we definitely get responses, people saying playing on social sites or sites that offer like free gaming. We really go through those and validate and clean out responses to make sure that they offer real money bets. So out of those valid websites, we then make sure that they've gamed or wagered on at least one of those websites in the past 3 months. So that is how we get to the past 3-month online gamblers.
Excellent. So when we get into the results a bit here, so do you want to start? Let's take us into the results, and let's take a look at some of those channelization numbers in the province of Alberta.
Sure. Yeah. So Alberta's a good place to start, only because kind of probably everyone's gaze is fixed on Alberta right now,
A little bit, yes.
given what's going to happen next year. So what we see in Alberta is, and I'll just start with the overall number. So we see an overall channelization rate in Alberta of just under 23%, so 22.7. We usually don't go into like super fine decimals, but for this type of work we do. So 22.7% of past 3-month online gamblers had reported that they played on Play Alberta. Now you have to consider that in most worlds of online gambling with players, you aren't just in one market or another. You can straddle the fence. It is possible for an Albertan to have a Play Alberta account, but it also is possible that an Albertan might have other accounts with other properties. And so that 22.7 is kind of an aggregate of just the overall number that plays with Play Alberta. And then if you do the flip side, 77.3 are only using unregulated websites, right? So there is a kind of a straddling of the fence, and basically if you break down the channelized players in Alberta, we find that around 12% of those are using a combination. So 12% are kind of, they've got a Play Alberta account, but they've also told us that they're playing with other operators. But then 10% are playing, or 10.5% basically are only or exclusively using Play Alberta. So that's kind of how the numbers break down in Alberta.
And you allot that number, that 12% number that play him both. You sort of allot it the full amount to both sides of the equation when you, but because we don't know how much they're playing in particular, but that they are playing.
Well, we could dig into the data, of course, to find out, is it one other site? Is it 3 other sites? Is it, Play Alberta is only getting, a quarter of their spend? We can dig into that, but on the surface, as far as calculating channelization, it's either you're in the legal market or you're not in the legal market. It's one or the other.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's another set of numbers below that you looked at in terms of the participation. Right. And this I found very interesting in terms of where Albertans seem to be, in good numbers participating.
Well, yeah, and so this actually speaks to when Trevor was explaining how the sampling was done. The numbers at the bottom of the page are from that sort of overall population-based sample, whereas the numbers that I just finished talking about are from the past 3-month gamblers. So overall populations, we found in Alberta 33.5% of the population, adult population, said that they've done some online gambling in the last 3 months, which is it's a healthy number. It's comparable to BC, which we'll see in a minute or so. And then, of course, you can expand out a horizon time of, say, played at any point in the last year. That goes up to 39% of the Alberta population. Or if we want to look at a shorter time horizon, played in just the past 1 month, 24% of Albertans have said that they've played some online gambling activity in the last month. And these are pretty healthy numbers. Despite the fact that Alberta has only had Play Alberta for a short time span, we know just anecdotally from other work that we've done, Alberta is a gambler's market. There's lots of interest in Alberta among the population, and so these numbers they make sense.
And I know they've had some of the highest per capita spend numbers in the country as well. So we do know, and those very healthy Oiler 50-50s during the playoffs have been a great example of that too, I think.
Yeah, and I don't think it hurts anything that Alberta's got a really strong casino, land-based casino business. And so when you think about transferring experiences from land-based to online, you've got a big base of kind of customer clientele there that are probably interested in being in the market.
That's it, and obviously it has been a very robust gaming market for a long time. But let's move on to BC if we're good to go in terms of taking a look at British Columbia. Obviously, they've been in the online space through BC LC's Play Now platform for well in excess of a decade, almost two. And so it'd be interesting what you found in British Columbia.
Yeah, so actually, probably because of the more longevity of Play Now in the market, I think they've possibly first opened around 2010 or 2008, something like that. The study that we just finished shows that the overall channelization rate is just a shade under 40%. So quite a bit stronger than Alberta. And again, I think it's a testament to how long Play Now has been active in that market. So 39.6 is the actual number I've wagered on Play Now. 15.5 of that is that combination that might have a Play Now account, but also maybe some other accounts. And then 24 or 23.9 is the exclusive to Play Now. So they have in BC, I would say that they have a better kind of exclusivity number than Play Alberta does, right? 24% exclusively playing on Play Now. And then when you subtract all that from like the 100%, you get still around 60% of the BC gambling market playing only with unregulated properties.
But the participation numbers I found are really quite interesting from British Columbia because they're higher.
They are a little bit higher. So 34% basically are past 3-month gamblers, 34% of the BC population. And then if you expand out to a longer time horizon, so the full past year participation rate is 41. And then, of course, if you go shorter, 24% played in the last month. So a little bit better than Alberta. But again, Play Now and its longevity in the market, it's many more years of advertising, benefiting from communication, educating the public. Not surprising. There's probably some demographic differences between, just in the makeup of BC versus Alberta as well at play. But those are the overall results, and I think that they to us ring true. They have a lot of validity just based on what we know about these two markets in the West. And so What I'm curious to see, obviously, like everybody, is how, particularly in the short term, the Alberta numbers are going to be changing over the next 1 to 2 years.
Yeah, we know from Ontario's experience. Obviously, we saw OLG's market share did go up, and partly due to that, as you said, that brand loyalty, that brand longevity that they have, and they've seen. They answered the call of competition and came up with a site that was compelling for people, and being able to be there from the and be in the market as the regulated market, private market opened. They were there, and with obviously a new and improved product, and so it has it's telling in the sense that these brands do have strength, and it's obviously it's evident in some of the results you found here.
Yes, absolutely. I think the other thing that benefited OLG in Ontario is the the opening of the market, the burst of advertising and the communication points around gambling were all of a sudden a lot more visible to many more people. And that in and itself creates sort of a curiosity and maybe a tipping point for people who might have been, say, tossing around the idea of trying out what online
Right.
gambling is, or trying out betting on some sports, and think, I don't know much about this, and I would probably be in this camp. I don't know much about this, but if I'm going to put my chips anywhere, it's with, I'm just going to play it safe and go with the government site. So I think a lot of that market heightened awareness, OLG benefited from that, from some of it for sure.
Oh, clearly. I mean, that's they were there, and there was the the newness of that trust factor was a big part of it, I think, in people's stock. Moving on to the next part of the study, though, we've often talked, and I talk really about Canadians have been playing online for since basically the internet began, over 2 decades, early 2000s, and so a lot of people, don't know the difference between what's regulated and what isn't, and what they thought. And I know that's some of the things you asked players if they knew what the sites they were playing on were regulated. So, Trevor, do you want to dig into some of that in terms of what we saw, in terms of what players, where they think they are and what they're playing on?
Yeah, for sure. We definitely have some interesting results. So in the survey, we did have a question, as you said, for those websites or apps that they played on in the past 3 months. We said, hey, do you think this is a regulated, unregulated, or do you not even know? There was a I don't know option, a website. So what we found is with Play Alberta, in Alberta, 93% of the people that played on it in the past 3 months did say, this is regulated. I know this is regulated. And if you compare that to BC, Play Now got 96%. So very high. The people that are playing on these sites, they know it's regulated. But where the interesting piece comes in, of all of the unregulated websites and apps that we captured in the survey, we took an average to figure out who thinks that they're playing on a regulated website. And in Alberta, the average ended up being 55% of those that were playing on an unregulated website actually said, hey, I'm playing on a regulated website. So there was a misconception there. Half to just over half of the people playing on those websites. And if you compare it to BC, the percentage was 51. So you can, whether you're in Alberta or BC, about half of the users of unregulated websites believe that they're playing on a regulated website. So it definitely interesting there. And just to talk to kind of ranges too in Alberta. So the range went from 38 to 67. So there was one website that 67% of their users thought that they were regulated. And in BC, the range was actually bigger. It was 28% to 79%. So it's really interesting.
Yeah, that's Brian. I mean, there's a longevity of some of the unregulated sites that have been in the Canadian market for decades, and knowing that people see them, they can use their bank cards. They believe it's regulated because they can access it, and it's usually effort free to do that. And I think that that's something that, and they obviously are delivering a high degree of trust for people to keep playing on them. And I think that that's it's telling, because a lot of things when we say to governments of when you need to look at fully regulating the iGaming marketplace, is that people are already there. I mean, I often say that's, any move is not to expand gambling; it's to expand the regulation of gaming. The gaming is already occurring, and I know Minister Nally in Alberta has been quite vocal about saying in his efforts as he working Bill 48 through the Alberta legislature and others, saying this activity is occurring. People are playing. We know that. And it's time to bring the regulatory standards we expect that we've been delivering as governments to the entire gaming market. And so I think this is a testament, because it's been an ongoing conversation. I go back to the CGA did not a specific work back in maybe a decade ago and asked the public, do you think online gaming is regulated? And the numbers were in the 70s. And in that case, and that was probably even pre-Ontario launching their own site, and definitely pre-Alberta. So it's been a very it's interesting, because over the familiarity that's come with all of this, that why it's time, and we looking at governments to say it's time to do this, because we need to create those level playing fields for Canadian gaming operators, create the regulatory standards that you're expecting and been delivering in your jurisdiction, and apply to everybody and all forms of gaming. So we need to get into some of the questions of why people gamble inside, what they like, what they don't like, and why they end up where they do. You looked at what features that drive people. Anything unique that came from that section about asking people's preference and why they're in certain places, what drives them to an unregulated site versus a regulated, or what they look for? And is there anything unique that came out of what you found when asking about features?
Yeah, for sure. So we did have a question in there where respondents were able to kind of rank what's important to them when choosing an online gaming website. And regardless in Alberta or British Columbia, the top 4 were actually the same. The top thing was fast withdrawals, but the next few were secure payment options, bonus offers or promotions, or no fee withdrawals. So those were the top 4 things that our respondents were saying that they're looking for. And then it kind of shifts a little bit between Alberta and British Columbia, but the next couple things that they were looking for was a good selection of different games and user-friendly website or mobile app. But what was kind of interesting too to talk about is one of the options was regulated by provincial regulatory agency. And we did notice that that was more desired in BC than it was in Alberta. But it wasn't, yeah. So that's kind of what we found was interesting there.
I guess some of those ad campaigns have been running and working.
Yeah.
Well, I think it has a lot to do with that, right? BC has had many more years to tell that story about regulation, and even they've really dialed it up in the last couple of years. So that was not a surprise that we saw that.
No, it's true. No, last I want to kind of move in and talk about the players and who are they, and a bit of the demographics, and are we seeing anything unique or different from the players in the demographic of who's playing online in BC and Alberta, some of the similarities, some of the differences.
Yeah, well, when we talk about demographics of online gamblers, many people still believe that it is a young male-dominated industry, and I think that's true if you parse out sports from casino, or truer. But of course, this study sought to measure kind of the whole sphere of online gambling, which includes sports and casino and everything all in one. And so we do have a little bit of a skew towards male, but it's actually quite close. So Alberta, 54% of the past 3 month gamblers are male, 45% female. In BC, it's closer to 50-50, like 52 male, 47.5 female. So really not the huge skew there on gender. Probably age is the one thing that does skew a little bit younger, regardless if we're talking casino or sports or just in general. So quite a lot of the gamblers, and we see this in many different jurisdictions, quite a lot of the gamblers are 18 to 34, so 44% in Alberta, 41% in BC. So that's quite a lot of Gen Zs and millennials. And then you've got another, say, comparable amount, 44% again in Alberta, 40% in BC, that are in that sort of Gen X type range, that 35, late millennial, Gen X, 35 to 54 age bracket. And then where you see a really big drop off is just with the older gen, like the boomer generation, 55 and older, only 12% in Alberta and around 19% in BC of gamblers are in that age range. So definitely more of a skew to those first couple age brackets, which is something we see in a lot of places, not unlike Ontario, not unlike other markets in the US or Europe. I would say if we're talking about, say, kind of socio-demographic factors like their education attainment, employment status, a lot of those metrics are strikingly similar to what we see in sort of even like a general population sample. So
that's what I noticed when I looked at that.
Yeah, and what we typically do is we look at, on the educational attainment side of things, we look at three kind of overall buckets. So we look at the under high school attainment, we look at the completed high school or dabbled in university, and then we have a third bucket that is, you know, like a 4-year basic university degree or higher. And roughly we get a third, essentially in the overall population. And among the gambling population, it's strikingly similar. A little bit more so in Alberta, you get that kind of those thirds. In BC, even slightly more skewed towards the university or higher, slightly less on the under high school figure there. So what that always tells me is that it's in some ways it dispels a bit of a myth of gamblers or the act of gambling kind of takes advantage of people that don't understand like how gambling works, and that it's mostly it's mostly less educated people. But these figures consistently in the research that we do demonstrate that it's not necessarily that. It's very much similar to the overall population.
No, it's. I think in you know what I took away from a lot of the results is that it is like many other gaming markets. That there wasn't anything terribly unique that stuck out in terms of player habit, the demographics. And I thought that's, I guess it speaks to some of the longevity of the unregulated market in Canada, that I've often referred to it as the semi-mature online gaming market in Canada, because of the fact that Canadians have been playing and had access for so long, that it's not new for many. It's the accessible. If you want it, it's been there if you choose to go get it. And so that's why I think that when we look at a lot of the habits, and obviously looking at features from sites and other things, to say that they're, you know, the only things have been, I don't want to say baked in for a while, but I think that they've been the habits have been formed, and you know, and I think that there's what we know is that there's been, and we look to Ontario and look at some of the results, a strong player base that's available. So in that, I just want to get last comments that you want to make about the channelization studies, advice for people looking at these, and before we wrap up.
Well, I guess I would tail on to a comment that you made a little earlier, Paul, is, and also add that while the channelization rate in BC and Alberta is nowhere near what it is in Ontario. It likely will get there once those markets fully open. And to a comment that you made earlier, these are very active, normal-looking gambling markets. The population of gamblers looks very normal compared to almost any other place. And I think that the challenge for the industry at large will be, and maybe on the regulators or the governments, will be on taking a set of people that have been doing an activity in the gray market for probably a long time, and all of a sudden educating them on what is regulation, why should I care about it, like how do I notice it, what are the benefits to me and my province and my community. That's probably going to be as important as anything else, because again, you've got people that have formed habits and they've got relationships with different properties. You've now got to teach them about regulation and why they should care.
Very much so, and that was the case in Ontario with a lot of people understanding there was the coinciding with the opening of sports betting, a little more, really taking hold as the very new product at that point in time for Ontarians and Canadians in general, and sort of seeing that explode into the market and the variety. When Ontario decided to take the step to create the regulated marketplace, they clearly understood one of the measures and of goals they set out was protecting consumer choice, because they understood where people were playing. They understood people were in this marketplace, and they weren't about to try and take it away to force something else, but understanding how they could facilitate the unregulated becoming the regulated. And I think that's where you now see with 50 plus companies and 80 plus sites in the marketplace, that one, consumer choice is alive and well in Ontario. So Trevor, any last words?
No, this is really exciting stuff to be able to share this. So thank you for having us here.
Well, I want to thank you both, and thanks to IPSOS for the great work that you both do in the gaming space in Canada and across North America. And I want to thank our friends at Gaming News Canada, and don't forget to visit their site for more information and podcasts for them. And if you're wanting to learn more about the Canadian Gaming Association, visit us at canadiangaming.ca. And on our homepage, there's a subscribe button. So punch that, fill out the information, and you'll get more updates from us on what we're up to. So with that, thank you, Trevor. Thank you, Scott. Appreciate the opportunity to discuss the research today. And we look forward to joining you again on the next episode of Get to Know Canadian Gaming Podcast. Thanks very much, Ryan.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.